Okay, should say recording in progress. You may get an alert, but should be recording now. Okay, well, I want to thank you for agreeing to be interviewed and thank you for your patience in going through all the technology here.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have Chris. So this is Kate here with another video. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. Helps me build the channel. We have Chris Reed here from West Virginia. You're from Charleston, West Virginia, and you're running for Congress.
Yeah, that's right.
Look, you're running the Democratic Party. This is the first congressional, West Virginia's first congressional district.
Yes, after the last redistricting, we went from three districts down to two. So it's very simple. We have the northern and the southern district, and I'm in the southern district, number
Okay.
one.
Okay. Is it bordering Tennessee or Kentucky?
We're close to Huntington, which is the tri-state region of Ashland, Kentucky, and Ironton, Ohio.
Okay, okay. That's interesting. Now you ran for Congress in 2016, candidate for the Mountain Party, which is the West Virginia version of the Green Party. Is that correct?
That was for the state House of Delegates in
Oh,
2016.
oh, I see. Okay. How did you do?
Well, not so well in vote totals. Only got like 303 votes.
Okay, okay. Well, no. Now you told me you sent me a message a little bit about your activism. You have a long history of activism, which is really interesting. You were involved in Central American activism in the 80s, anti-apartheid work. You did Palestine solidarity work. You also write for a blog, Mad in America, about the abuses of the psychiatric profession, psychiatric drugs. Um, and you have some really interesting stuff. Now, what impelled you, what drew you to your current campaign?
Well, I'd kind of like to go back to Washington. I
Okay,
liked it there. My son graduated high school in 2015, so that opened up a little bit more time on my hands. And now that I'm retired, I'm in a position that I could move back to Washington, D.C. My wife retired from the local hospital from infection prevention after 40 years. So we have a little bit more flexibility in our lives now that my son has grown.
okay, okay. And now you're running in the Democratic Party. You won the nomination. Was that difficult, or how did that? Because I imagine your politics are pretty far left. And how did that go over in the mainstream Democratic Party?
Well, as we speak, things are getting more and more interesting.
Okay,
Um, so basically, all I did was get $65 worth of business cards. The bulk of my campaigning took place during the legislative session
okay.
when people from all over the state come in to pitch their organizations, and they set up booths around the rotunda in the Capitol. I just go around and introduce myself and find out a little bit about their organization. That's my favorite way to campaign, is one-on-one, face-to-face.
Right.
And I took the Israeli-Palestinian dispute class down at Marshall back in the spring. So that got me back on Marshall's campus. I got to meet a couple of the history professors down there and interact with the students in class. And I'm still trying to reach out to some of the student organizations there. Then I go around to different functions and events that they have around, mostly in the Kanawha Valley, but I went to the Marshall Job Fair and the Marshall Minority Health Fair, which were both very good opportunities to talk to people from different organizations. But I won 56% of the vote in the primary.
Okay.
Neither me nor my primary opponent are well known statewide.
Okay.
He's from Greenbrier County, so he did quite a bit better in Greenbrier County than I did, and I did better than him in my home county, Kanawha County, which is where Charleston, the capital, is.
Mhm.
Um, so that, and Kanawha County is a much more populous county, so that was basically the difference in the race.
Mhm.
But as far as running an anti-interventionist pro-peace campaign in the Democratic Party, I'm running into a little bit of static with party partisans on Facebook. They're not all together happy with the fact that I won't support Harris.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So you actually are the Democratic nominee for Congress from your district from West Virginia, and
Yeah.
your opponent, I believe, is Carol. Republican opponent is Carol Miller. Is that correct?
Yes. Her father was a congressman in Ohio,
Okay.
and she's from a family with the car dealership Dutch Miller Chevrolet, and her son ran unsuccessfully for the nomination for governor on the Republican side this go around, and didn't make it.
Okay, I see. Interesting. Now, how does it look? Do you think you have a good chance of winning?
Well, it's a three-way race.
Ah,
There's an independent candidate, Wes Holden, who's a former Rockefeller aide. Jay Rockefeller came down from New York as a Vista worker back in the 1960s and worked his way up from the House of Delegates, Secretary of State, governor, and then finished out his career as Senate. So Wes Holden has more establishment connections around around the state than I do. So
okay.
some of the Democrats want to throw their support to Holden because they're upset with me refusing to back Harris. But there's bylaws and such things that are making things difficult for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can take advantage of some like contradictions within the system.
Well, for instance, the Kanawha County Democrats put a flyer out of the Democrat candidates, and they left me off of it.
Ah, okay. So you're kind of being dissed by the official Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Well, what is the Green Party in West Virginia like? Is it fairly sizable, or what is it like?
Well, the Mountain Party is what we call the Green Party affiliate here in West Virginia.
Okay.
It started, I believe, with the 2000 election. We have a novelist here, Denise Giardina, who wrote The Unquiet Earth and another novel about West Virginia, and it deals with the mine wars, labor struggles in the southern West Virginia in the early part of the century.
Okay.
So she tried to launch an independent campaign for governor, and then out of that campaign emerged the Mountain Party. And somewhere along the way, it got affiliated with the Green Party.
I see.
I went to the Mountain Party convention in 2014, and then I ran for the House of Delegates with the Mountain Party in 2016. And then I went to the Mountain Party convention in 2022, but the chair wasn't interested in a congressional campaign with the Mountain Party. Her reasoning was she didn't want to take a sure loss in a congressional race
Mhm.
with the Mountain Party. So that was 2022. So I'm thinking I can spend $1,730 and get on the ballot on the Democratic ticket and see what happens. I had been watching the congressional races in West Virginia for the last several cycles, and it just seemed to me that the Democrats never really put up a competitive candidate. And if you look on their ballot, there's 100 members of the House of Delegates in the state legislature, and there's 34 state senators. And my estimation, there's probably 25 uncontested races where the Republican has no opponent in the general election. So the Democratic Party is a shell of itself here.
Right, right. They're not. They've come deliberately abandoning West Virginia. You think, or they're deliberately allowing the Republicans to take over, or the business interests to take over.
Um, with
Or
Well,
they're
it
just
certainly seems like to me that the D-triple-C is taking a dive because
right.
they're not really interested in supporting, congressional campaigns here. They want to put their money in races where they think they can win. As far as the local Democrats, we still have the shadow of Joe Manchin over the Democratic Party here,
Right, right, right. I was
even
going to
though
ask
he
about that.
switched to independent.
Right. Yeah, he played a pretty horrible role. Joe Manchin, he's a major shareholder of a mining company.
It's a small mining company. It's up in the northern part of the state. He's up in the northern part of the state. As you're going up towards Pennsylvania, he's from the Fairmont Clarksburg area, which is near WVU, where the university is. Um, he's not. I mean, I don't think he's super wealthy from the coal mine, but he does dabble in the industry. That's
Okay.
for sure. And I think the one thing to keep in mind, I think he was the only Democrat that's ever been a member of ALEC, American Legislative Executive Council.
Okay, that's the Koch brothers group,
Yeah, I believe so.
The Bill Mill group, I think. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. He's a pretty horrible guy. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay. Were you guys affected by Hurricane Helena? Or was that
The very
more
southern part of the state
okay?
in Mercer County got a little bit of flooding, and the Bluestone Dam, which is not too far. It's in sort of over towards Hinton, and I believe the dam is in Summers County. So the water got pretty high at the dam, but
Okay.
we didn't have any serious problem. There's a little bit of power outage, and people had to do hand out water. They were doing a good bit of advertising around here to get relief for the folks in North Carolina, though, and there are
Right.
people from here that went down to North Carolina.
Right. North Carolina was very hard hit. It's interesting. Politically, is West Virginia going for most likely going for Trump or going for Harris, or is it hard to tell? Who has most support?
Well, Trump has been averaging in the mid to high 60s on the
Okay.
percentage taken in the general election in 2016 and
Uh-huh.
2020. Um, the la- the switch over when West Virginia started voting for Republicans in the presidential election, it's been a sweep since 2000.
Right. Okay.
Um, Before then, West Virginia was a heavily Democratic state. They voted for Nixon in the landslide year of 1972, and I think we voted for Reagan in '84. But I think pretty much the rest of the time it's for Democrats
Okay.
until 2000 when it switched over to voting for the Republican candidate, and then the legislature flipped to Republican in 2014.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. So Trump, I guess Trump has a lot of support. Oddly, he's seen by a lot of people as a working class candidate, even though the guy's a billionaire. And the Democrats have alienated a lot of people. Now? What's your take on Kamala Harris? You're not endorsing her, but what's your take on her? I think she's horrible myself, but
Well, um, I don't think she really has any fixed positions.
right.
It's just sort of she fishes around. It's like she goes to what do you call them? Called
Town,
the
town meetings.
focus groups,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and you hear what people say, and then you want to tack your sail to the wind of whatever you think people want to hear. I don't know. It's not a very good leadership style. And I was listening to Glenn Greenwald, I think it was the morning before last. He has a nightly show, and he was really showing just how bad she is at answering basic questions in an interview that's not even a softball interview. Sometimes she has trouble.
Yeah. Anderson Cooper had like a softball interview with her on CNN a few weeks ago, and she fell apart. Even that. Yeah, she seems well. Biden and Harris both seem like empty suits. Like they're front men. They're not making decisions. I think it was well known that Biden had dementia since 2019. And the fact when he bombed out in the debate that time, it threw the system into crisis because the president doesn't run the country, no matter who it is. They're just script readers for the oligarchs who actually do run the country. So it kind of threw everything into crisis. Um, what are the main issues in West Virginia that people are concerned about right now?
Well, we have local issues here. We've been hit with the opioid crisis, I think, harder than any other state.
Okay, all right.
And then that results in that has a lot to do with our foster care crisis.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
And even though we settled the teacher strikes in 2018 and 2019, the PEI insurance for the teachers is constantly hanging over their heads. That's never, I mean, they're always wanting to raise rates. And for I'm a retired teacher, so the teachers in the border counties are often enticed to, work in Maryland or Pennsylvania in particular because the salaries are higher in those states.
right.
So there's a drain of talent from the teacher pool here.
Okay, right, right. I remember the West Virginia teacher strike. I was following it. I remember that with 2018. Yeah, I remember that. Some guy organized it. I forget who he was. He was with the IWW. That was interesting. So yeah, I live in rural Maine, which also has an opioid problem. Not as bad as probably as where you are, but it's bad in rural areas all over the country. Economically, how is West Virginia doing? Is much of it economically depressed, or what is the economic situation for most people?
Well, when you're watching the national media, which tends to look at things through a partisan lens, you have, the Democrats citing, low unemployment and wage growth and such like that. And then you find that, quite a few people in West Virginia we're the poorest state after Mississippi. So we have a large segment of the state that's working poor.
Okay.
We have a fairly substantial homeless population in Charleston, and that issue is bubbling up right now in Morgantown, where they're trying to put in a ordinance against camping or using tents.
Right.
So, it's we've never really recovered from the deindustrialization of the 70s, and then again with NAFTA.
Right. Right.
And the coal mines in the eastern end of the county, we just got through shutting down a middle school and 4 elementary schools, actually consolidating 4 elementary schools because they can't afford to fund the smaller schools because the smaller class sizes and such. It's a budget buster. So we're constantly closing down schools here and consolidating. It's that's been a constant issue.
Right. Right. Interesting. So the main issue is the economy is not doing too well. The coal mining is still the major employer in West Virginia, or a lot of the coal mines shut down, or?
Well, the coal mining industry has continued on. I don't think in the last 8 or 10 years it's declined anymore, but it's been a steady decline, really starting probably with the mine mechanization in the 1950s, and just and then with mountaintop removal is not nearly as labor intensive as underground mining. So mountaintop removal just doesn't employ nearly as many people.
Right.
And then Kentucky and West Virginia used to be 1 and 2 for coal production. Now Wyoming has overtaken Kentucky and West Virginia.
Okay. Okay. Are a lot of young people leaving West Virginia, would you say?
That's a constant issue. My son right now is living with his wife in South Bend, Indiana. They're finishing up their PhD program in math at Notre Dame.
Okay.
And it just doesn't look like what he wants to do as far as pursuing his math program is going to work out in West Virginia. One of the other things, besides shutting down the schools, we just got through last year cutting a lot of programs and majors at our flagship land grant university, WVU in Morgantown. So one of the programs they cut out was math.
Right. Hmm. That's not good. That's not good. You think it would be in big demand right now? It's economic consolidation. Yeah, there's a lot of liberal gaslighting, especially from the Biden and Harris campaign, that the economy's doing really well, the unemployment is low, and things are really doing so well. But you actually talk to a lot of working class people, things aren't too well. Like smug liberal journalists tell us how well things are, and things aren't doing that well. It's interesting. Interesting. Foreign policy. Is there much of an interest in foreign policy? Like in the Palestine conflict? Is there much of an interest in that in West Virginia?
Well, I didn't make it to the first ceasefire protest at the city hall. I believe that would have been in December or January.
Okay.
But I made it to 2 ceasefire protests in Charleston, and then I attended a symposium at the mosque in South Charleston, which South Charleston is right next to Charleston. It's part of the metro area.
Okay.
And the protest at the city hall was jam packed.
Okay, that's good.
And but we managed to get, I think, 7 votes out of maybe 28 on the council.
Hmm.
And the Democrat mayor, Amy Goodwin, wouldn't back the ceasefire protest.
Yeah.
She actually lit up one of our bridges in the colors of the Israeli flag.
Ugh. Yeah, that's not good. Mm. Mm. Zionism has a tight grip among many politicians and much of the ruling class in the West. But it's good there was a protest. Was there a tent encampment at like University of West Virginia in colleges?
I kept checking the list of encampments, but I really couldn't find any in West Virginia.
Okay.
Um, I was helping my brother out. He had an operation. He lives up in Pittsburgh, and I stopped off at Morgantown. This would have been probably in the middle of October, give or take.
Okay.
And the Islamic Student Association was having a luncheon out at the student center there in Morgantown. And I stopped and talked to a few people. And it was a mix of people, folks spanning from Syrian nationals, from Sudan, various other places. And, it was like at this juncture, our local TV station here in Charleston, which is a Sinclair affiliate,
Mm-hmm.
actually started fundraising for Israel
Ugh.
right in the aftermath of October 7th.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not a good sign. Not a good sign, but that's what we're up against. I guess APEC has channeled a lot of money to West Virginia, and I know many southern states are very. Is West Virginia one of the states that has a requirement that anyone doing business with the state has to agree to not support a boycott of Israel, BDS? Is West Virginia one of those states?
I've not seen it written myself, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And Joe Manchin has been known to co-sponsor bills like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I don't know how many, mainly southern states. I think 15 or so states have bills like that. Ivy Martin, the journalist, was going to give a lecture in Georgia, I think University of Georgia, but she had to sign this agreement that she would not support BDS as a condition. I mean, she sued the state and she won. That was interesting. Well, okay. Who do you think's going to win, Trump or Kamala Harris? And do you think it matters?
Well, I can't support either one of them.
Yeah, I can't either.
So, in my estimation, it's just too hard to tell. My brother, like I say, my brother lives in Pittsburgh, which is, probably the most crucial swing state.
Mhm.
So if Harris loses, I'm hoping it's because of Michigan.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I do think it will be a little easier for me in what I'm trying to do here with Harris in office, because whatever turns out in this election, I plan on continuing with my efforts and perhaps even running for the U.S. Senate against Shelley Moore Capito in 2026. And I just think it would be easier to be in opposition to the foreign policy of a Democrat administration here in West Virginia, which votes 2/3 or better for Republican candidates than having to go up against the Trump administration from
right,
here in West Virginia.
right. I understand that. Right. It would be like the Democrats are unpopular in West Virginia. I guess so. It would be easier to go against their foreign policy, but give it
Yeah.
leftists. Yeah, I get that. I have a feeling that whoever loses the election is going to contest it. I have a feeling it's going to be pretty messy for weeks or months after. Might even be like what historians call the corrupt bargain of 1877 after the Civil War. Feeling things could get, I hope not, but things could get pretty messy. Mm.
Well, my way of thinking is the elites aren't as divided as they want us to be divided.
Yeah,
Um, but unfortunately, there's a lot of partisanship, and my main issue is foreign policy, and my criticism of Carol Miller is for her unconditional support of Israel, funding the Ukraine war, and her hawkishness towards China,
hmm,
which all those boxes are checked by the Biden-Harris administration as well. So this is not a partisan issue, and I try to stress to people that we really shouldn't be at each other's throats over who's going to win this presidential election. It's not likely to be decided here, and on this key issue, it doesn't make that much difference.
right, 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 right. What do you say to people about the Ukraine war? I see it as a proxy war against Russia. Like it's horrible there. What do you say to people about what's going on in Ukraine?
I was just on Facebook this morning with a fella who ran for this congressional seat back in 2012, back when Shelley Moore Capito was the current U.S. Senator, was in the House of Representatives, and he's given me, I'm carrying water for Trump and Putin, and this
Yeah,
typical smear job.
Get that a lot.
And
Yeah.
my basic thing is, I mean, it's not that, you know, our poor diplomacy, you know, the NATO expansion, I think, is the key instigator of the conflict, coupled with our interference in the internal affairs of Ukraine, overthrowing their government and dividing the country is, you know, a major, if not the key factor in instigating the war. And then I point out that there was a chance to end the war a month into the war, which was sabotaged by the U.S. and the U.K.
Right.
And then the Progressive Caucus, the following fall, put out the letter calling for negotiations, and they were shut down, as was General Milley, and that was the high water mark of the Ukraine war effort. So the longer the war goes, the worse off Ukraine gets. So if you're supporting the war, you're not supporting Ukraine.
Right, right. Something like 700,000 Ukrainians have been killed. As you said, the war could have ended in March of 2022. The U.S. sent Boris Johnson to meet with Zelensky twice. They were close to reaching a peace deal in Istanbul that time. I remember Boris Johnson met with Zelensky, said, "Nope, no negotiations. We'll send you as many weapons as you want. You can beat Russia." And the war continued. The war could have ended back then, but it's impossible for Ukraine to win. It was completely impossible. Russia's a vastly bigger country. And yeah, it's a proxy war, which is used to destroy Russia. It's a very costly proxy war, and it's failed, but yeah, that's the thing. Um, how do you explain what's happening in Gaza to people in West Virginia? I mean, it's pretty remote from a lot of people, and there's been a big support for Zionism in the U.S., particularly among many evangelical Christians. How do you explain the Palestine conflict?
Well, the Ukraine, in some ways, is easier because, you know, the Republicans are a little less enthusiastic. At
Hmm.
least the folks that vote Republican are a little less enthusiastic about the Ukraine war. Now, Gaza is a steep climb. You know, I grew up here in I was born in 1960. So I remember vividly when the movie The Late Great Planet Earth showed the Hal Lindsey.
Right,
Um,
right. I remember that.
and so there's a strong non-denominational evangelical church movement. Of course, it's waned over the years as fewer and fewer people are church going, but
Mhm.
a lot of it is embedded in the Christianity that a lot of the pastors, it varies from church to church, you know, preach the end time Zionism.
Mhm.
And, you know, that brand or that take on Christianity really emerged from the British Protestant tradition. So, you know, we had a revolution against the British. So why do we turn around and adopt, you know, their this understanding of Christianity and, you know, and take over being the imperialist of the region from them.
Right, right, right. Well, continue. I remember, yeah, Ilan Pappy wrote about that, how Zionism evolved in Britain to support the British Empire and the Ottoman Empire, which was collapsing, to give the British Lord Palmerston, I believe, and I forget who, but yeah, there was a Schofield.
Balfour.
Yeah, 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 Balfour, and yeah, it was interesting history. Okay, yeah, one more thing I'd like to ask you. You write for the blog Mad in America on the psychiatric profession or abuses with psychiatric drugs. And you discussed on Facebook, you discussed the with Trans Allegheny Hospital, Western State Hospital, was known for abuses. What happened there?
Well, let's say I got entangled with psychiatry when I was living in Washington, D.C. in 1989.
Okay.
And I spent time at this asylum in Sykesville, Maryland called Springfield Hospital.
Okay.
And then I ended up at Weston State Hospital, which is actually the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. That was what it was called when it was part of the state of Virginia. It was under construction in the lead up to the Civil War, and so it was never finished under the state of Virginia.
Okay.
So the original name was the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, but when West Virginia took it over, it became Weston or Weston State Hospital. So, you know, I didn't know anything about the history or workings of psychiatry until I found myself behind the 8 ball. And for the first 15 or 20 years, I didn't really delve into it too much, but over time, it just didn't seem like it was on the up and up, or it was on the level. So I started reading, you know, some of the main critics of psychiatry: Irving Goffman, Peter Bregan, Thomas Saz.
Right, I'm familiar with him. Right.
R.D. Lang.
Right, I know him.
And about this time, I took up a counseling program at the graduate college at Marshall.
Okay.
And, you know, I was just starting to really explore these ideas, but I was getting a lot of pushback from one professor in particular, and I just wasn't having enough self-confidence at the time to really stand my ground on what I was writing about and what I was discovering, because, you know, I wasn't so sure about, you know, because you're, you know, when you get involuntarily committed, it does kind of put a sting on your self-confidence. And, you know, so I drifted away from that program. But this was about the time that Mad in America was getting set up by Robert Whitaker.
Okay.
And he's done a lot of work demonstrating that the long-term use of these psychiatric medications, particularly for what's labeled as schizophrenia, the long-term effects show poor outcomes compared to, you know, third world countries like I believe India and Nigeria, where the medicine is used less often,
right,
and the actual outcomes are better.
Right.
I believe it's Finland that has open dialogue,
Okay.
which they tend to look at the person's, you know, social connections and focus less on the biological component that today's psychiatry primarily is based on the idea that psychiatric illnesses, were labeled as such, are brain diseases, which the the really key turning point is the DSM-3 that came out in 1980. You know, that's where you see a sea change from psychiatrists delivering psychoanalysis and shifting more towards drug therapy.
Right. Interesting. Right. I got to say that Zoom may log us out. Thanks for coming back.
Cool.
Yeah, Zoom only allows like a 40-minute limit or something. Okay, great. Well, we'll just continue. You were discussing the psychiatric profession and the hospital, the horrible some of the practices they do there, that the different use of drugs for schizophrenia. If you could continue, I forget where we left off, but is there anything you'd like to add about that?
Well, it's sort of parallel. I got interested in psychiatry from, you know, my own experience with psychiatry. And as I said, I was briefly in not briefly, I got about halfway through the counseling program. And I was developing a very critical perspective towards psychiatry. And that wasn't really enthusiastically embraced, particularly by one instructor, but parallel to this, I got my certification in Spanish and social studies. So I entered the teaching profession first as an adjunct professor at West Virginia State College, teaching sociology and history.
Okay.
And then I entered the public schools as a Spanish teacher.
Okay.
And this was, I went back to college the second time. Before I went to Washington, D.C., I was a bicycle messenger in Washington, D.C., along with being a social activist.
Right.
So I think my first classroom would have been maybe 1996. So the advent of the ADHD diagnosis was probably in its infancy when I first entered the teaching profession. So the introduction of psychiatric drugs, particularly for ADHD, depression, anxiety, bipolar 1, has been sort of like an ooze. It's just almost like a tidal, I guess more like a tidal wave than a breaking wave. It's just sort of, it's just gradually increased over time. And, ADHD is a psychiatric diagnosis. And so, I live with a bipolar diagnosis, which I no longer identify with. I did for quite a few years, but I no longer identify with it. So, these children are interacting with the psychiatric profession the same way I am. And, it's a really ticklish situation because the diagnosis involves, teachers, parents, medical professionals, of course, psychiatrists. And really, most people accept these diagnoses at face value because it's coming from somebody with a medical degree, and psychiatry is reinforced in public culture and popular culture. The whole notion that you need to take these drugs to stabilize yourself and treat the illnesses. It was written into a lot of movie and TV scripts. So there's a lot of support for this, and most people just accept this as at face value. But there's quite a few psychiatrists. Roger McPhil is actually a psychologist, but Dr. Sam Tamimi is probably the best authority on why ADHD isn't a real medical diagnosis. Well, anyway, so the long story short, as I'm proceeding through my teaching career, I'm seeing, the ADHD conversation and bipolar just become a common topic of conversation, particularly among students that I'm overhearing. And it's become very pervasive. And the last job I held was working at an emergency child shelter. And part of your duties as staff there is to dispense with medication. Right. And so not only is psychiatric medication and diagnosing increased with children in general, the foster care and at-risk youth are prescribed the drugs at an even higher rate than other children.
Right. That seems like it's a lot of abuses have crept into that. There's a theory that the epidemic of mass shootings is due to SSRIs, too many people being put on SSRIs.
I believe it's a Danish psychiatrist, Peter Gochich, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Okay.
He's really been particularly concerned with, SSRIs causing violent behavior. The SSRIs also can cause sexual numbing, and they're really hard to titrate off of. Right. So once you get hooked on them, it's hard to get off.
Right. Interesting. Have to be careful what we say because this is YouTube, and YouTube censorship is becoming increasingly strict. But What's your RFK Jr. talks about make America healthy again? I don't politically support RFK Jr. for Zionism and a whole bunch of other things, but he did say some interesting things about the SSRIs and things like that. And his campaign to make America healthy again. Not talking about his take on the vaccines, but his take on the junk food and crap you buy in the supermarkets. Do you think that could lead to anything, or what's your take on that?
Well, that's interesting. Michael Tracy and um, Lee Fong
Mhm.
were debating that on Glenn Greenwald's show the other morning.
Okay.
And of course, Michael Tracy was pointing out, RFK scam as far as, the Zionism and, fake residency and his whole, Kennedy Camelot shtick and
Mhm.
what a sham all that was. And then Lee was pushing back a little bit on what you were talking about, the healthy, what's it called? Healthy.
Yeah, it's about make America healthy again. It's a takeoff on make America great again, the MAGA thing. Just make America healthy again.
Yeah, there might, Lee seems to think there was something to that. The particulars, um, well, we do have, we consume pretty poor diets in this country generally.
We do. Obesity is
Uh,
a big problem in this country, yeah. And it wasn't many decades ago. Like pictures of people in the 1960s, it wasn't as much of a problem. Now you see it everywhere.
my son got married in Beijing this summer, and
Mhm.
so we spent 2 months there, no, 2 weeks there, and we noticed that obesity was very rare in China.
Yeah, yeah. I lived in China for a couple of years. I've noticed that. Yes, if you travel outside the U.S., obesity is not now. Here you see it everywhere. Very seldom see it in China. You're right. Good point there.
So, part of it is sedentary lifestyle. Um, and some people think corn syrup is a main culprit.
High
So,
fructose corn syrup is in everything. They put it in everything. God, yeah.
yeah. um, but just a little aside on the vaccines. My wife was an infection control nurse at the hospital for most of her 40-year career,
Okay.
and my son started dating a girl from his summer camp,
Hmm.
and their parents were vaccine skeptics.
Okay.
So it's sort of like the Romulans and the Capulets,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
was
Right.
it Romeo and
Uh,
Juliet?
Montagues and the Capulets. Yeah. Right. All right.
So, but um, you remember that the the vaccine debate roiled the gray zone a little bit. Ben Norton had a different
Right.
view on. So it not only it wasn't necessarily just a Republican versus Democrat debate. There were on the left there were people that some I think they supported Max supported the Canadian truckers and Ben didn't.
Right, right. Ben Norton has left the gray zone largely over that. Yeah, I remember. It's pretty nasty, nasty split. Like, Max Blumenthal said that Ben stole one of their websites. They did Moderate Rebels website, and he stole the website. Yeah, that was pretty wild. Yeah, it's been fighting within the left as well. Gotta emphasize for YouTube censorship that the vaccines are safe and effective, and you should agree with the CDC. Just for YouTube, send YouTube, make YouTube happy. But yeah, that's interesting. So you were a school teacher for years?
Yeah. Um, I ended up spending most of my career at Charleston Job Corps.
Okay.
And I did a variety of things there from teaching GED and reading to hotel clerk to facilities maintenance
Okay.
to orientation.
Hmm.
And um, it was very interesting. And, having read Irving Goffman's Total Institution about psychiatric asylums,
Hmm.
The description sort of fit Charleston Job Corps in a lot of ways,
Right.
because you bring these young people in here to Charleston, and they're cut off from the folks back home and their friends and community back home, and many of them don't have the requisite maturity and skills in dealing with trauma in their background to be able to abide by the rules sufficiently that they can get passes to go into town.
Right.
So quite a few of the children or the young people don't take advantage of what the city has to offer because their life revolves around everything at Job Corps. And but one of the most interesting facets was we recruited out of the Washington, D.C. area. So we had a very large Ethiopian contingent the whole time I was there.
Okay.
And I think this holds true for most immigrant groups. So they tended to navigate the rules in the system better than the American born students. They could see if they would just follow these basic rules that they could get 2 free years of college.
Okay. Okay.
But sometimes it set up the model minority dynamic that you typically associate with Asian students,
right,
that excelling academically. And so, sometimes there was a little backbiting between the Ethiopian and American students and so on. And then it occasionally the Ethiopians and Eritrean students didn't always agree on, um, how they saw, you know, how Eritrea broke off from Ethiopia
oh,
back in
right,
the
right,
90s.
right. Interesting. Oh,
But I think one of the best features of Job Corps is the staff was roughly 50% white and 50% black. So, black staff professionals, we operated on fairly even footing with one another.
okay.
Black professionals gravitated more to maybe working at a Charleston Job Corps than maybe they wouldn't feel as comfortable working in one of the more rural schools in the county.
Right.
So they were more heavily represented at Job Corps than throughout the rest of the county.
Okay. Okay. Hmm. That's interesting. And then okay, that's interesting. Now you pivoting slightly, you work with Code Pink.
Um, I was supposed to have gone. I was supposed to have gone on their 2015 Valentine's Day trip to Cuba during the Obama thaw, but the
Okay.
State Department rejected my passport photo because there was glare coming off my glasses.
Oh, well, okay.
But I caught up with them on International Women's Day up at the Capitol in D.C., and I met Medea, Jody Evans, and Ann Wright. And they're sort of like their heavy hitters.
Right, right.
And we went around to congressional offices. I believe it is Chantel Brown, the congresswoman that beat out Nina Turner
Okay, okay,
in Ohio. So we stopped by her office, and
okay.
she's a recipient of like $1 million of APAC funding.
Yeah, yeah. So you were in the Capitol building itself, and you were
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, wow. Okay, okay. That's pretty,
So the basic strategy of the Congress folks dealing with Code Pink is to send out a staffer to talk to them.
mhm.
Instead of talking to them
Oh yeah, they
directly.
didn't want to do it in person. Yeah. Oh, okay.
But um, that was interesting. I didn't feel it was my place to to do any of the talking in those situations. I just sort of observed. And then I went back, I believe it was July when they were out on recess.
Mhm.
And Medea had a teach-in on APAC in the Longworth cafeteria,
Okay.
and maybe had about 75 people there taking part,
Okay.
which was pretty cool. And then we went over and had about a 2 or 3 hour lunch at the cafeteria when we were done. And it's interesting. On one hand, you're meeting staffers, but then there's also people that just, from all walks of life, you just want to take part. You're just regular folks.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Well, um, interesting. Okay, I'm gonna have to go. My dogs are getting restless. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Um, well, the only thing I think I would add is that, the besides being morally wrong or foreign intervention, it isn't worth the money we spend on it, and it'd be better spent on funding our higher education in public schools here in West Virginia instead of these quixotic proxy wars against
Right.
Russia. And the only other thing I would say, as someone running for Congress in West Virginia, my decisions not only affect the folks in my district here in West Virginia, my decisions would likely have impacts on people throughout the country and the world. So when I'm out and about, I'm not shy about talking about my campaign to somebody if I'm in Washington, D.C. or at the New Hampshire primary or at the uncommitted protest in Michigan that I went to, or the protest at the DNC. So, I pitched my campaign to people, that just I would strike up a conversation. If it seems appropriate, I bring it up.
Okay, right. And how can people support your campaign?
The best way to find me is either on Facebook or Twitter.
Okay.
Chris Bob Reed on Twitter.
Chris Bob Reed I'd Chris Bob Reed on Twitter. Okay.
And that would be a good place to start. I'm still getting my um, website up and running,
Okay.
but I'm thinking I'm going to fold this campaign into a Senate race.
Mhm.
And I'll have to weigh the options about whether to jump straight into the Senate race, or there may be some better opportunities not to announce, and maybe I want to do something else before I officially announce. But yeah, Chris Bob Reed is the best place for anybody around the country on Twitter to get a hold of me.
Okay. Okay. Great. So I should have this posted in a day or so, and I'll provide links to your Facebook profile and your Twitter account.
Okay, sounds good. How did we ever get in contact in the first place? Do you remember?
Yeah, on Facebook, you invited me to a Facebook group. I'm not super responsive to Facebook messages, to be honest. I apologize, but we're Facebook friends. I'm Caitlin Yulianoff on Facebook, which is not my real name. It's Kate Fry, but you invited me to a Facebook chat group, I believe. Is
Cool.
You like the stuff I posted. We're kind of politically on a similar wavelength.
Yeah, I like your title of your YouTube.
Oh yeah, well, we are many, they are few. It's from a Shelley poem, "The Mask of Anarchy." It's written about the Peterloo massacre, which was a massacre in Peterloo, England, outside Manchester, like in the 1820s. It's part of a working class revolt, and the British just went berserk, started killing. About a dozen people were killed. That was a famous incident, but.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to it. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, thank you. You too. Thank you very much.
Okay, appreciate it.
Okay. Bye bye.